Chapter 2, Cursed Objects. Spinning around in my chair, I checked the newspaper. Thanks to the request I had brought to Franz, the paper was conspicuously devoid of any mention of the events in the decaying district that had dominated yesterday's front page. It hadn't even been a day since I had called him on the sounding stone, but he had already done a fantastic job altering the flow of information. The lesson here was that the influence of a noble was more powerful than the connections Eva had spent years building up. After checking for any other interesting articles, I closed the paper and nodded with satisfaction. Because of his efforts, today looked like the day I'd finally be able to relax and do nothing. I let out a yawn, which seemed to be a breaking point for my sister, who was nearby on the sofa. She got up and said, "What do you plan to do today?" Today. Right. Today I'll recover my strength." "That's what you did yesterday." I evaded her humorless glare with my usual methods. "Well, patience is a virtue. Please don't tell me you're trying to justify doing nothing." Lucia was a diligent person. She used to smile a bit more when we were kids, but her personality hadn't changed. She had always had her act together and never missed an appointment. Unlike some of our friends, she generally never broke the rules and made sure to study daily. One day off a week was enough for her. If anyone had changed, it was me. Her constant look of displeasure was probably just because she was in a rebellious phase, and perhaps because she thought I was such a good-for-nothing. If anything, it was commendable that she hadn't gotten rid of me. I can't say I would have been able to do the same in her position. "I bet all my talents and diligence were siphoned off by you," I said, stifling a yawn and sitting in my usual spot. Her gaze became a few degrees colder. "We're not even related by blood." "No, listen, when you've got such a competent younger sister, it's only natural that you regress. It's a matter of balance. Having a grand magus in my family also gave me unrealistic standards for magi. Lucia was at least in part to blame for the way Chris, the Abyssal Inferno, and many other magi were always upset with me. "It's not often you guard me 2 days in a row," I remarked. "Nobody else was available today," she grumbled. "We're busy people, I'll remind you. It'll be someone else tomorrow." I didn't have any complaints. With Lucia around, I could use my relics as much as I wanted, and I was glad we were getting a chance to spend some time as siblings together. That had become a rare thing lately. Before leaving our hometown, my parents told me to protect Lucia, even if it meant putting myself in danger. Not to brag, but I didn't think there was a single person better than me when it came to getting hit first. At odds with his immense stature, Ansem had reflexes and speed, both of which had, in a sense, been tempered by me. He would always protect me in any situation, making him the most reliable man in our party. Despite finally having some sibling time, Lucia was in an awfully foul mood. But just as this thought crossed my mind, I hit upon an idea. "Here," I said, clapping my hands, "since you're around, why don't we make a new spellbook, like we used to?" When she was just starting out as a magus, I often badgered her into making spellbooks. The thought brought a nostalgic smile to my face. "And," she said frantically, "we don't know what the attackers might try, and I'm the most versatile. And Mother told me to look after you." Where are my pens and notebooks?" "Tiv, that's right. My instructor keeps telling me to bring you over. Could you come with me sometime soon? She's quite upset because I suddenly cancelled my exam because of the Supreme Warrior Festival." "I've got it. How about a spell that turns your instructor into a frog?" No. Stop this." Red in the face, Lucia tried to snatch the pen away from me. I flicked my arm out of the way, evading her grasp. As a magus, she wasn't a bodybuilder like Luke and Liz, but she was still stronger than I. She had me beat in talent, training, and mana material. However, she was at that age, so unlike, say, Liz or Citri, she was doing everything she could do to avoid making physical contact. This made it easy for me to dodge around her. What's more, unlike Liz, she couldn't move faster than I could blink. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll turn her into a frog. Your instructor must have a bad eye for people." Stop saying nonsense. Unlike the mentors of some of my other friends, Lucia's instructor was a bookish and rational person, but that was exactly what made her a person you didn't want to anger. It wasn't that she would make a scary expression or get violent, she just emitted a suffocating pressure, and I didn't know many other people capable of that. The only survival method I knew of was becoming perfectly comfortable. That, however, was something I wanted to avoid. She was someone who had done a lot for Lucia, so I tried to be as genial with her as I could. Lucia missing her exam ended up helping resolve the incident with Key of the Land, so I didn't think her instructor had any reason to be too upset. A lot of destruction had been mitigated thanks to Lucia. I've got it. Quit dodging. What? What is it? Hey, brother. Hey. Maybe I could rely on Franz to resolve this as well. Not even one of the Empire's leading magi could talk back to a powerful noble. And it's not like Franz could like me even less at this point. Man, I'm on fire today. Everyone should have a noble among their acquaintances. Lucia tried sneaking behind me, so I turned my back to her and held the pen away. There was no real purpose in taking the pen from me, and if she really wanted it, she could have just used magic, but she wasn't going to go that far. Right, we used to play around like this all the time, I thought. The next moment, I made eye contact with a pigeon chain, not that it actually had eyes, outside my window. Another letter from Matt. This meant I had to stop playing with Lucia. Here, one moment, I said, handing her the pen and opening the window. Huh. Oh. Right. Matt had just told me he couldn't come over to do an appraisal, so what could he want? I opened the letter and gave it a serious look. Lucia was still agog at the pen. I read the letter once, again, a third time, and once more for good measure. I took a moment to think, then nodded. All right, Lucia, get ready to go out. We're headed to the Sword Saint's place right now. Huh? What? What happened to not going out? What's in that letter? That was the plan, but things have changed. I don't think anything's wrong, but I'm going to get ready. Understood. Mathis's letter was shocking. Apparently, the previous evening, a powerful devil sword had caused an incident at the Sword Saint's dojo. A swordsman had become possessed by the sword and went on a rampage, resulting in a dozen or so apprentices getting cut. Relics were a fairly common source of trouble in the imperial capital. Normally, I'd just say, darn, that sucks, but this incident was ringing a few too many bells. The bad news was that the dojo's owner, the Sword Saint, hadn't been present last evening. The good news was that when he returned in the morning, he was able to subdue the rampant swordsman, and nobody was killed. Matt was contacting me because the Sword Saint had brought him the relic for examination. Apparently, this blade had the same distinguishing features as the one I had asked him to appraise. I hadn't even imagined that thing was a devil sword. I hadn't felt a thing when I touched it, but maybe that was because it was of the sort that chooses its wielder, or maybe it only activated at night or something. If nothing else, I could be certain I shouldn't have handed it off to Luke. He was by no means a bad guy, but his love for swords was abnormal. He had been bewitched by devil swords before, and I could easily imagine him gleefully cutting away at his peers. But was that really any different from his usual self? Whatever the case, this was no time to say I didn't want to go out. The Sword Saint wasn't just a master of his craft, he was also someone who valued courtesy. Though I hadn't meant any harm, my present had done just that, meaning I had better apologize as soon as possible. The newspaper hadn't mentioned anything resembling this incident, so I assumed nothing too terrible had happened. But if I tried to act like this wasn't my fault, I'd definitely find myself getting sliced. The Sword Saint might forgive me, but his apprentices were a vicious bunch. The Abyssal Inferno had the might of a legion, but the Sword Saint's apprentices had even more. There would be no place for me in the imperial capital if I made them angry. It's a dangerous situation, and we're in a hurry, so let's go by air. We'll have to take the flying carpet or your broom. I still didn't have total control over the flying carpet. However, because Lucia's broom wasn't a relic, I had to ride behind her. She didn't let me do that very often as she found it embarrassing. Lucia hesitated when she heard my suggestion. Very well," she said in a small voice. "You can ride behind me. That carpet is no good. But I won't do this again." "Thanks. Let's get to it. I've got a change, so could you get the broom ready?" The Sword Saint was a kind man, but he was still Luke's mentor. There was no telling what might happen. "I have to get my relics ready. I have to ask Franz to mediate. I have to keep the damage to a minimum. We can't change what's already happened, but I have to at least make sure the Sword Saint doesn't look bad." "Yeah." The Sword Saint liked warriors, so he would definitely forgive me if I showed no hesitation when I apologize. I wanted to believe this would work out. I took a deep breath and, with the sounding stone connected to Franz in one hand, I scampered to my private quarters. Nadoli and the other apprentices had studied under the imperial capital's greatest swordsman and seen many famous weapons. But even for them, this sword had an enchanting glow that was utterly unique. In Zebrudia, powerful swords didn't often end up in the hands of pure swordsmen, but more often in those who were hunters. In this holy land of treasure hunting, relics flowed in at all hours of the day, but only a small number of those were sword types, and only a handful of those were anything powerful. On top of this, swords were one of the most popular weapon types among hunters, so most quality swords ended up being used by their finder. On the very rare occasion a powerful sword type went on the market, there was no telling how much it might sell for. There were many rivalries among covetous hunters and nobles. Even for an apprentice of the Sword Saint, obtaining such a relic was a distant dream. Of course, there were masterpieces among those produced by the modern smiths. These were more than sufficient to do battle with phantoms and monsters. These days, swords were fairly affordable, and Nadoli and the other apprentices all had their own. Still, a relic weapon was nonetheless something all swordsmen in the imperial capital longed for. If anything, learning from the Sword Saint gave them many chances to look upon such works, making their desire stronger than that of their peers. The apprentice who had brought this sword in was an eccentric man, the most troublesome of all the apprentices. He was Luke Psychor, the Protean Blade. More than any man in the imperial capital, he loved and was loved by swords. His application for apprenticeship had come out of the blue, and he had almost instantly become one of the strongest in the dojo. Despite the many ridiculous anecdotes about him, such as how his real sword had been confiscated because of his inclination towards cutting people indiscriminately, he was a member of one of the best treasure hunting parties in the imperial capital. Every one of the Sword Saint's apprentices had been admitted because they had potential. However, it took more than skill with a blade to eliminate the phantoms that dwelt in treasure vaults. Clearing vaults required luck, skill, and reliable comrades, all the more so in high-level vaults, where relics appeared with greater frequency. However, though he had nearly killed many of his fellow apprentices while sparring, and was flawed as both a person and a swordsman, he was undoubtedly a first-rate hunter. For someone who had cleared many vaults beyond normal hunters, even a sword-type relic likely wasn't worth fussing over. Over time, Nadoli had learned that Luke's party leader, the Thousand Tricks, was a relic collector and had a number of sword types in his possession. There wasn't anything surprising about that. Nadoli's mentor, Son Roel, wasn't a hunter, but his skills surpassed many high-level hunters. More than a few great hunters were former students of his, and some had brought him relic swords as a gesture of gratitude. Our leader, Krai, said this was a good opportunity and that I should bring this over, Luke said. Their mentor was somewhere else. Normally, it was unthinkable for apprentices to see a gift before their master. Yet Luke didn't hesitate when he removed the black cloth, then removed the sword from its scabbard. When he did, time came to a halt. The moment they saw it, all the apprentices, with the exception of Luke, gasped. The vast majority of sword-type relics had their origins in the era of advanced magical weaponry. The weapons of that era were not only powerful but also bore artistic beauty. This one, however, was different from any they knew. The ominous blade had a red glimmer to it, its edge was without a single nick, and it shone with a strange luster. Just looking at it made them restless. It was no wonder the apprentices were all looking at it with bloodshot eyes. This was something devilish. If this showed up at an auction, nobles, merchants, and hunters alike would all be bidding with rabid intensity. Their mentors' swords were all beautiful works, but none of them demanded absolute attention the way this piece before them did. It was humbling to think that a high-level hunter was capable of simply giving something like this away as a gift. "Huh," Luke whispered apprehensively. "That's funny, I coulda sworn this thing was black." Luke's words didn't reach Nadoli's ears. His heart pounded, his hands shook, and his mouth felt dry. It took all his strength, but he managed to pry his gaze from the sword and look at Luke. "Hey, for someone who likes swords so much, how can you give this away?" Luke was never someone bound by common sense. If Nadoli found himself in Luke's position, he would never consider giving the sword to someone else. Luke looked at him blankly, then simply said, "I know what you mean, but Krai told me to give this to my mentor. Besides, think about it. If I owned this thing, then I can't cut its wielder, right?" "I see." He really didn't. What Luke said was incomprehensible to Nadoli, but he had responded without thinking. That was fine. He could forget about Luke for now. The problem was what to do with this sword. This was a gift to his mentor. Nadoli and the other apprentices were all proud of him. They respected him. Snatching up a sword meant for him would be unforgivable, but Nadoli's swordsman's soul whispered to him. It was a silent voice, but he could hear it all the same. "If you never take up this blade, can you truly carry on as a swordsman?" "All right," Nadoli said. "But this sword is a relic. There's no guarantee it isn't a devil sword, or some other sort of cursed item that harms its wielder. We can't give our mentor something dangerous." His vision was foggy. He was surprised at the force behind his own voice. What he said was impossible. He knew that there were swords that affected their wielder in negative ways, but those were extremely rare, and this had come from the Thousand Tricks. This couldn't possibly be something dangerous. Even if he didn't know the results, Nadoli was confident they had already tested this blade to figure out its powers. Nobody was so careless as to give an unknown relic as a gift, even if the recipient was a mighty swordsman. While Nadoli's words sounded like an excuse, even to his own ears, Luke didn't seem particularly upset. He said. "Yeah, I guess you're right about that." An unidentifiable sense of pleasure overtook Nadoli. Luke had given him his word. But this was Luke, perhaps he was just being nice. It didn't matter. Nadoli wasn't planning to steal the sword. He just wanted to hold the sword, to swing it, just once. Just once. Probably thinking the same thing, the other apprentices swarmed around the sword and gulped. Before anyone could beat him to it, Nadoli spoke up in the same overpowering voice he used when training with the other apprentices. "If that's the case, allow me to test it out before it's handed to our mentor. Why don't we make sure that this sword isn't cursed?" Flight magic wasn't exactly safe. There were a number of ways to fly, such as by manipulating gravity or the wind, but maintaining balance was difficult no matter the method. Just making oneself float was manageable, but trying to move was where it got difficult. Failure meant crashing to the ground, so even the best magi often struggled with flight magic. For this reason, aviary relics and rideable winged creatures were expensive. Since allowing just oneself to fly was difficult, there was exponentially more trouble involved in flying multiple people. It was enough to drive many nations to raise magi who specialized in just flying magic. Meanwhile, Lucia knew a number of spells for flying. Staying upright and steady midair depended directly on the caster's motor skills. However, Lucia Rogi, the avatar of creation, had worked herself to the bone to match the spellbook I had made with Skyward Dreams in mind. I was sure nothing was impossible for her. Probably. "Listen, you need to hold on tight," she said sternly. "I might have gotten the gist of it while using Kuton, but staying balanced is really difficult." "Oh, that spell with the kite. You sure come up with some funny ideas." "Chem. Goodness. I could vaguely recall some story we read a long time ago that had a scene with a kite. Perhaps she had taken inspiration from that and developed a spell?" Heh. I guess she is the younger sibling after all. Once Lucia had mounted the broom, I got on behind her. I couldn't believe she could comfortably ride on something so narrow. I had only been on the broom a few times, but each time had left me with a sore bottom. Maybe the kite would be better, I said. Just hurry up and grab on. If she was going to bark at me like that, then I saw no choice and wrapped my arms around her. When she finished her incantation, the broom slowly began to rise. I felt my body wobble. With such a narrow surface, it was hard to keep my center of gravity stable even while holding on to Lucia. I could feel her inhale deeply. Then the broom instantly accelerated. The next moment, we had flown through the window of my office. All I could do was try and hold on. While escorting the Emperor, holding on to Chris while atop the Iron Mustang had been a trial, and that wasn't nearly as fast as Lucia's broom. Magi who could fly through the air at will were so powerful that some nations built military units around them. The broom approached a building at breakneck speed, only to change direction right before colliding. We began to climb, the intense G-forces causing me to make a noise like a frog being crushed. Now that I think about it, this is the first time I've ridden the broom in a city. I can't. Don't make those weird noises, Lucia yelled as I desperately hung on to her. I can do this. It's your fault I can't control it as precisely. You're going too fast. My vision spun, and I thought I might vomit. My safety rings weren't helping me, which suggested that G-forces didn't meet the conditions necessary to activate them. They probably just barely didn't make the cut. Not that I thought it would do me any good if they did activate. My world turned and twisted. I quickly looked down and saw dozens of tiny people chattering and pointing at the sudden appearance of Lucia the witch flying on her broom. We were over the main thoroughfare, which was usually busy with carriages coming and going, but now they were almost all stopped, their attention on us. Even in a place as populous as the imperial capital, it wasn't every day you saw people flying through the sky. The broom's speed increased even further, leaving the onlookers behind. We can't remain stable if I drop our speed, Lucia shouted over the roaring wind. Do you understand? How hard it is to stay upright like this? The wind was overpowering. I struggled to breathe. I felt like she hadn't always flown at such high speeds. Or was it just that I had gotten weaker? Like with the broom, I felt the air pressure when using Night Hiker, but I guess that relic came with some sort of countermeasure to soften the impact. Lucia, I said, absolutely bewildered, you've gotten good what? For a moment, Lucia disappeared. No. I was the one who disappeared. My body tilted. My arms went slack. By the time I had noticed any of this, I was already plummeting. Now it wasn't the wind pulling on me, but instead the ground. I was helpless. That, however, did not stop me from being at ease. I was used to falling, and I had my safety rings. Lucia cried out when she noticed I had fallen off, her screams echoing throughout the imperial capital. Why? Brothir. Lucia was usually calm, but now she was pale as a ghost and shouting between ragged breaths. I don't understand. Nice catch. Brother, please don't joke about this. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't trying to make jokes. What did she expect? I even fell off the Iron Mustang, so of course my hands would slip if we went as fast as we did. Good thing Lucia was so reliable. Chris was also reliable, but not as much as my sister. Even if we weren't related by blood, I was proud to be her older brother. I can't believe you managed to drop down and catch me, I said. You can really fly this thing. I guess it was a sort of acrobatics. When I was free falling, she caught up to me, screaming all the while, and reached out and caught me with her right arm. It was the sort of stuff that got turned into legends. Now I had gotten used to the broom's speed. The cityscape seen from above was so beautiful that I almost forgot to keep my grip on Lucia. Once again, she said, I've learned a completely useless skill. Well, learning is all about building experiences, I replied. Just apologize. Maybe she had a point. Perhaps I was a little too used to outrunning the jaws of death. Well, outrunning wasn't quite the right word. Making sure not to tug on her hair, I tightened my embrace so I wouldn't fall off again. "You really pulled through for me back there," I said. "Next time, I won't bother. Everyone should have a competent magus for a little sister." She charged my relic, and if not for her, I would have fallen apart a long time ago. Well, even without Luke and the others, I would have fallen apart. Or maybe if not for them, I would be retired and living a peaceful life. The moment this crossed my mind, I stopped thinking. The future is what's important, not the past. Changing my tempo, I endured the wind and looked forward, where I saw something unbelievable. I couldn't help but rub my eyes and look again. We were headed towards the place where the Sword Saint's dojo should have been. "That's funny," I said. "Wasn't there a large building here?" Lucia didn't reply. Soln Roel, the Sword Saint, was considered the imperial capital's strongest swordsman. Though he wasn't a treasure hunter, the skills he had devoted his life to honing were surpassed by only a few high-level hunters, and he was believed to be one of the best swordsmen of all time. In a land such as Zebrudia, where martial skills were lionized, he was naturally a man of renown, with authority comparable to the most powerful nobles. If you counted the branch locations, he had dozens of dojos in the imperial capital alone. If memory served, the building here was a gift donated as a show of respect by an apprentice who was also of the nobility. It was the main dojo, and it was supposed to be here. I could recall the excitement I felt, the cries of joy Luke and I had both let out when we first saw it. Now there wasn't a hint or trace left. Wait, no. Maybe there's that much left. Did they demolish it? I wondered. It was pretty new. Lucia didn't say anything. There was now a mountain of rubble where a massive training ground had once been. Surrounding it was a buzzing crowd of rubberneckers and knights here to keep the peace. There was a sporadic wall or pillar still standing, but this would obviously take some time to repair. Yet what caught my eye was the dojo's defining feature. It was a tall spire in the center of the building. It was now gone. Well, it wasn't gone. It was there, it was just about a third shorter. I wasn't imagining it. I could tell, with the roof gone and all. All I could do was laugh. Are they remodeling? Lucia, does that look shorter than usual? Ha ha ha. She stayed silent. My dry laughter disappeared with the wind. This can't be real. How? How do you shorten a spire like that? Heh. Why wasn't something this big in the papers? This was definitely the result of a disaster. What was strange was that the other buildings were all right. It probably wasn't visible from the ground, but the surface of the tower suggested it had been. I tightened my arms around Lucia, who was still not saying anything. Look, Lucia. It looks almost like it's been cut with a sword. But that can't be. You'd need a massive blade. Hey, say something. Lucia. Finally, she responded. Brother, you idiot, she murmured. This looked bad. It was possible this was my fault. Had anyone been hurt? Who did this? Was it Luke? Could I solve this with money and groveling? Could I just say I had never imagined something like this would happen? And how had a sword torn apart a building? Wasn't that odd? I want to run, but I can't. Maybe if I were on my own, but I was here with my little sister. She had already seen my bad side plenty of times, but I still had my pride. It looks like there are people gathered in the dojo, she said. I think I see Luke as well. I'll bring us down there. Keeping a tight hold on Lucia, I moved my head so I could see the center of the wrecked building. She was right, I could see a few figures amid the rubble. You're awfully brave, Lucia. The Sword Saint was supposedly very proud of this building. Even if I was only indirectly related, I had no idea what he might say to me now that it had been destroyed. It didn't help that Luke was always causing trouble for him. Luke was serious when it came to matters like strength and swords, but he didn't know any manners and showed no regard for money and authority. Considering that some of them were nobles, I'm sure some of Luke's fellow apprentices already disliked him. This just poured oil on the fire. Whose fault is this? Whose? Hold on. Just a moment. I didn't think, right. I didn't think someone as stalwart as the man considered Zebrudier's strongest swordsman would lose to a devil sword. She didn't say anything. Besides, I hadn't even known that thing was a devil sword. Sure, it had looked plenty ominous, but Luke and I had both been with it. Damn that Eliza. She always stared off into the distance, yet she had somehow managed to find a real nightmare of an item. As I tried to think up a new excuse, Lucia silently changed course and accelerated. Nadoli had failed. For a direct apprentice of the Sword Saint, this was a disgrace. He was willing to cut open his stomach to repent. His severed right arm, the pain racking his body, none of it bothered him as much as the shock of what had happened. There was only one reason he had stopped himself from taking his own life. Man, that was one great night. I knew devil swords make people really strong, but damn, I hadn't expected that. Krai, you mad genius. Ugh. What about that was genius? It was because of the grinning, dustcoat man in front of him. Even though he was the one who had brought the source of all this, Luke Sycall not only appeared devoid of malice, but he was in fine spirits. In front of this man, Nadoli couldn't possibly slit his stomach. A renowned dojo that had produced countless great swordsmen was now in ruins. The intimidating gate, outer walls, and ceiling were all ruined. It was hard to think anyone would look at this and imagine it had all been caused by a single sword. Even after being cleaned up, the scent of blood still lingered on. It would normally be unlikely for a single sword to cause so much destruction, but that was no ordinary sword that the 1,000 Tricks had sent in. Devil swords came in a number of varieties. Some granted power in exchange for something in return, some changed functions depending on their wielder's talents, while some chose their wielders and raised them into first-rate swordsmen. Not all swords of the era of advanced magical weaponry could be comprehended through modern sensibilities. It wasn't until after it was all over that Nadoli realized that this blade was hazardous even by devil sword standards. The moment he had gripped that bewitching sword, he felt an irresistible urge to swing the blade, and a sense of omnipotence, like all the world was his for the taking. All swordsmen felt a strange sense of elation when holding a sword for the first time, but it was something several thousand times stronger than that which had exiled every other emotion from Nadoli. Swordsmen were generally expected to not just know how to swing a blade, but also have good character. This was so they could put their acquired skills to proper use. It was in part because Luke poured all his passion solely into swordsmanship that he still wasn't regarded as one of the best. Nadoli should have noticed it earlier. He should have been on his guard the moment he felt those eerie pangs, the moment he laid eyes on the sword. He should have resisted his impulses and exercised self-restraint. He should have been a role model for his fellow apprentices. A desire for strength, envy, animus, conceit. Devil swords could latch on to the weakness of human hearts. Many of these blades were capable of inspiring fear, but they were also powerful, with beautiful forms to match. A simple swing of this could cut the world. It was light as a feather. It could cut everything, even the air, unimpeded. In terms of pure power, this devil sword probably had few rivals. It had taken to Nadoli's hand almost like it had become part of him, like it had always been there. No, that wasn't it. When Nadoli grabbed it, he felt like he was a part of it, as if cutting creatures was his reason for being. Luke was a maniac who was not only unfazed by the attacks of a fellow apprentice but actually started swinging back. Though if not for him, Nadoli might have killed all the other apprentices. Of course, if Luke hadn't brought that sword, then none of this would have happened in the first place. Luke Sycall was a problem child. He had a straightforward passion for swinging and had cut many people, including fellow apprentices. However, he hadn't destroyed many buildings. Wrecking the dojo and causing such a stir that outsiders heard about it was a first. Knights had already arrived to ask what had happened. There would be no hiding this, nor would it be forgiven. Nadoli could clearly recall what had happened while he had been at the mercy of the devil sword. Burned into the back of his eyelids was the sight of his mentor's blank face when he came to find the dojo in ruins, the apprentices collapsed, one of his apprentices possessed by a devil sword, and Luke eagerly swinging back. Poor showing from his apprentices affected the reputation of the sword saint himself. This incident was Nadoli's responsibility. Though his mentor might forgive him, that was beside the point. "Ah, that was great," Luke said. "Super strong. Leave it to Krai to really understand me. That was what I wanted. Only problem was that I couldn't duke it out with our mentor, since he wasn't here and all." "Why you dolt?" Nadoli said. "Our mentor would never give in to a devil sword." The piles of collapsed apprentices had all been carried off so their wounds could be treated. The only people left were those who had arrived after the fact. The pools of blood had been cleaned up, and the severed body parts removed. Last night, the only ones in the dojo were those who showed exceptional dedication. But many of these victims hadn't been cut by Nadoli. He glared at Luke, who had been all too glad to fight him. Nadoli wasn't the only one who had lost to the allure of the devil sword. When he could no longer move, another apprentice had been pulled in by the sword, and when they could no longer move, another apprentice had been pulled in and attacked Luke, the one person not affected by the sword. Even a devil sword was still dependent on the strength of its wielder. After taking down Nadoli, Luke should have been able to get the other apprentices to a safe distance before any of them could reach the sword. Yet this man. The source of this tragedy was now gone. It had been returned to its scabbard and wrapped in the cloth Luke had brought it in before being taken away by their mentor. Once it had been examined by an expert, it would become clear how dangerous that sword was. It should also help them understand what the 1,000 Tricks had been thinking when he sent it. While Nadoli sat, fuming, Luke crossed his arms and looked down at him. "No need to look so glum," he said brightly. "Ansem can replace a missing arm. That sort of stuff's his specialty. We've got a few people who need his help, so this will be good practice for him." Luke had a number of wounds himself, but he didn't look like he was in any pain. If that's not the problem. He was so casual. You'd never think he had just cut so many people. You'd never think he had nearly killed so many people. Even after being chastised by Nadoli, he didn't even flinch. The gathered apprentices were looking gravely at the two of them. They didn't say anything, partially because they were leaving judgment to their mentor, but also because Luke occupied a unique position among them. Words had no effect on Luke. Despite this, he was brimming with talent, loved swords more than anyone, and didn't have any qualms about cutting and being cut. He didn't cave to authority, and he ambitiously pursued strength, earning him many friends and foes. His biggest issue, though, was that he was so unrestrained that it wasn't hard to imagine him cutting down fellow apprentices and destroying the dojo even without the involvement of some devil sword. If Nadoli hadn't been directly involved and had only heard about this afterward, he likely would have just brushed this off as more wild behavior from Luke. After all these years, Nadoli knew him well. Why was he still so deeply upset at someone impervious to words? Even their mentor had stopped talking to Luke himself and instead started going to his party leader, the 1,000 Tricks. It was Nadoli's inexperience that had allowed him to be drawn in by that sword. He couldn't show his face around family, friends, or his mentor. At the same time, however, he still had objections he felt the need to raise, no matter how pathetic they might have been. "I'm not talking to you anymore," Nadoli said to Luke. "Let me talk to the 1,000 Tricks. I want to talk with your leader. I need to know what he was thinking when he sent that sword to us. Do you understand? You might not know this, Luke, but in this land, to send someone a devil sword without warning is a violation of the law. I refuse to believe he was ignorant. I don't buy it. I don't care what our mentor says. I want to talk with the 1,000 Tricks." "What? Chill out, Nadoli. Krai didn't do anything wrong. I asked him if he had someone I could cut. Then he gave it to me." Who the hell would respond to a request like that by giving out a sword that eroded people's hearts? Even a level 8 wasn't supposed to do things like that. Was it not just Luke? Did nobody in Grieving Souls have any regard for the law? And never mind that. Why was Luke asking for someone he could cut? Nadoli resisted the dull pain he felt in his abdomen. Perhaps in his excitement, he had accidentally reopened his wounds. He began to feel faint, but he had to hold out. He wouldn't even let himself visit a doctor until he had seen this through. He had to at least hang in there until his mentor returned. Luke abruptly looked upwards and began waving his hand. "Ah, it's Krai. Over here," he yelled. What? Nadoli ignored his body's protests and forced himself onto his feet, where he then got hit by a strong gust. Having been driven by sheer willpower, his knees gave out and he tumbled backwards. Feeling pins and needles throughout his body, he let out a voiceless cry. The other apprentices cleared a spot. Then, descending in front of him was a black-haired girl. She was riding atop a broom and was uncannily beautiful. Her straight hair extended to her waist, and her pale skin was without a single flaw. Though lacking warmth, she was pretty and carried an aura of intelligence. Her pure black magus garb was subdued in style, but its mystic impression suited her perfectly. Nobody rode on brooms. Not outside of fairy tales. Nadoli forgot to breathe. He forgot his pain, he forgot his anger. Perhaps the other apprentices felt the same way, as nobody said anything about the sudden appearance of this mysterious fabulesque magus. Amid the abrupt silence, only Luke was unaffected. "Krai. You came," he said, sounding oddly pleased. "That was the best. I'd cut one down, and another would grab the sword and come at me. That thing had quite an edge too." Luke. Nadoli cried. "What are you talking about? The 1,000 Tricks is a man." This couldn't be right. Nadoli had seen the 1,000 Tricks before. He was there when Luke joined the dojo, and he had visited a number of times after that. He was a man with black hair and black eyes, with a face that could be politely described as gentle or rudely described as unremarkable. But there was the matter of gender. The 1,000 Tricks was a man, not some beautiful girl. The only thing they had in common was their hair and eye colors, and saying that was an insult to the girl. The apprentices had supposedly tempered their minds and hearts under the Sword Saint, yet they were shrinking back. Some of them weren't even hiding their scrutinizing looks. Strength came in many forms. Very few of the Sword Saint's apprentices were female, and most of them had powerful physiques comparable to Nadoli and the others. For many swordsmen, though they would never admit it under any duress, it was their dream to protect a frail, tragic, adorable magus. While all the other apprentices were left breathless, Luke blinked, then furrowed his brow. Oh. Lucia is Krai's younger sister. Though I don't often see her on a broom. What's up, Lucia? Training? Indeed, she said after a pause. Her voice carried a pleasant ring. Nadoli doubted his ears. Krai's sister? That couldn't be. Then, from the back of the broom descended the source of all this madness. Krai's here, Luke, soaked in blood, whispered fervently. That hasn't happened in a long time. He seemed in a good mood, though I had absolutely no idea why. The damage looked bad from above, but it seemed even worse when viewed up close. I had absolutely no idea what had happened, but the sight of the broken spire, the gates that were now rubble, and the deep cracks that scarred the ground all made my stomach churn. I had absolutely no idea what had happened, but I felt a number of glares directed at me. The students of the esteemed Sword Saint pulled themselves up from the ground like zombies. I had absolutely no idea what had happened, but Luke was drenched in blood and inexplicably cheerful. I have absolutely no idea what happened. Absolutely none. Lucia clutched her head and let out a sigh. She was probably thinking she had another mess she had to take care of. She wasn't wrong, we'd just have another catastrophe if we let Luke clean up. Parties are all about mutual assistance, I thought as I patted her on the back. Not many people want to spar with me these days, and my blade was getting thirsty for blood. Thank you, Krai. Para simpa. No gracias, para simpa, yay. Luke held out his hand for a high five, so I went along with it and obliged him. I was just glad he was enjoying himself. But as I suspected, that wasn't his own blood he was coated in. We made him use a wooden sword to prevent him from indiscriminately cutting people, but there was no point if he kept doing it anyway. But this was hardly the first time I had wanted to tell him that. This was also hardly the first time he had caused trouble for the Sword Saint. Most people would die if they got cut by Luke, but a swordsman with mana material was made of stern stuff. Their vitality surpassed what was normal for a human. If anyone had died, he'd be in a lot more trouble, so he had once again narrowly avoided that. Luke's violent rampages had once been a big source of anxiety for me, but now I was used to them. "Are you all right?" I asked. I figured I may as well, since I was his friend and all. "Yeah, I'm fine. I managed to dodge most of them. If I had to say, this is my only huge wound." Luke rolled up his sleeve, revealing a muscular arm with a deep horizontal wound. It was obviously a deep cut. I would have died from something like that, but Luke didn't look like he was in any pain at all. "What's going on with your body?" While I struggled for words, Luke calmly replaced his sleeve, then looked at Lucia. "Right, Lucia," he said. "Could you call Ansem? We've got several guys with missing arms." I could hear those guys saying something. I figured I could leave the wounded in Lucia's care and just not think too hard about any of this, but the glares were getting unbearably intense. The people at this dojo treated me like I was responsible for Luke's behavior. Or maybe it was more accurate to say Luke didn't listen to people, so all complaints ended up directed at me. What a mess he had caused this time around. Luke loved cutting people, but if he had nearly destroyed the dojo, perhaps he was testing a new technique or something. I pretended not to notice the countless gazes on me, and tried to improve the mood. Man, I haven't been here in a while. Did something about this place change?" Silence. "I dunno, it just feels more open," I went on. But I'd say this has its own appeal." Crickets. I quickly caved and apologized. Sorry. I never imagined this would happen. Soln's apprentices are all first-rate, after all. Not even the preter-human artificer could have foreseen this. Here, you can send an invoice to First Steps. I know it sounded like I was making excuses, but this was all Luke's fault. Luke's. I gave the grounds another look. Rubble could be cleared with magic, but not even Lucia had yet learned a spell that could fix things that had been broken. I was particularly concerned by the bent spire. This looked like it would cost money, meaning this wasn't a job for Lucia, but rather for Citri or Eva. "I've got it. We can get Ryulan's help, even though we still can't communicate." It was then that I realized that I wasn't hearing any of the gripes that the apprentices would normally be sending my way. After constantly avoiding looking at them, I timidly glanced in their direction. They were looking my way, but not at me. They were looking behind me, at my door sister. It occurred to me that this might be the first time Lucia had ever come to the dojo. It was in the opposite direction from the academy she studied at. The only grievers who came here were myself, or Ansem if there were people to be healed. What's this all about? For some reason, the apprentices were all still, as if frozen by ice magic. "Freezing at the sight of someone's sister is awfully rude," I said. Forgive us," the one at the front stammered awkwardly. "It's just, she's quite beautiful." "What?" "Huh? What are you talking about, Nadoli?" Luke said. I couldn't stop myself from looking at Lucia, who was blinking, mystified. This was a first. I didn't really know what to do, but I made an attempt. "Just because it's true doesn't make it a compliment," I said hesitantly. "Be brother?" The apprentices began to chatter among each other. Oh. Perhaps these guys were weak to Lucia in the same way Mathiz was weak to Tino. Despite their rugged exteriors, these guys actually had a cute side to them. "You gotta train your spirit more, my friend," I said, giving the one in front a jovial pat on the back. "Ugh. Sorry. See, this is why you got cut by Luke." "Chem. I don't think it has anything to." "Right. Next time they want to complain, I'll bring Lucia along. I wonder if this will also work on the Sword Saint." These guys must have been really soft if they were stunned by just a girl. I thought they said training the mind, body, and technique was central to the Soln school of swordsmanship, but these guys were coming up awfully short. On the other hand, Luke was stupidly strong, while lacking in one very key aspect, so maybe I shouldn't say anything. Unlike Tino, Lucia didn't seem to care at all that I was using her to my benefit. She gathered her wits, loudly cleared her throat, and began yelling at me. "Never mind that. What do you plan to do? This happened because you carelessly gave that thing to Luke. Magic can't fix this, and even if it could, this is a dojo with a deep history." "Yeah, Listen to me. Now, calm down, Lucia. Nothing in this world can be taken back. There's no returning to the past. It's one of the few things I learned from my time as a hunter. All we could do was live proudly while holding on to our memories of the dojo." Feeling like I had attained enlightenment, I stood and let Lucia talk my ear off. Then, the older apprentice suddenly yelled, his loud voice harsh on my ears. "It's no problem, sir. Our ineptitude is to blame. Miss Lucia, there's no need for you to worry." He was looking intently at Lucia, not me, just as I had hoped. Though I was thrown for a loop by how he talked like Chris. "You don't have to feel bad about the ruined dojo," he continued. "Through our intense training, we're always doing things like making holes in the walls. I'll talk to our mentor." "You heard him, Lucia," I said. "He says there's no need to worry. What a nice bunch of people." Oh goodness. I was fairly confident everything would be fine. You see, even the guys missing arms were fixated on Lucia. Did all swordsmen have some specific taste in common or something? With everything solved, there was no reason for us to stick around any longer. We needed to get out before anyone unsavory approached my dear sister. She looked both exasperated and uncomfortable. I grabbed her arm, then heard a scathing voice from beyond the rubble-filled training ground. "You half-wit apprentices. Call yourselves swordsmen, yet you let a girl throw you off balance." It wasn't at all a loud voice, but it was sharp, like a drawn blade. It forced me to stand up straight. The apprentices all spun around at once. Walking over the debris was an old man in a kimono. He wasn't a large man, but he had a sleek build trimmed of any unnecessary fat. His old hands and legs were bony, but still boasted immense strength on par with an active hunter, and retained much of the skill he had at his peak. With a plethora of accolades, he still came up first when discussing who the Empire's greatest swordsman might be. He was Soln Roel, the Sword Saint. He was the mentor Luke had gotten when he came to Zebrudia. He was also the man who made our already talented friend even more dangerous. But sir," the older apprentice said in a trembling voice. "It really was our own incompetence that let the devil sword. If that was how you saw it from the start, then I'll accept that explanation. How about it?" The Sword Saint glared at the apprentice. He was supposed to be in his 80s, but the glint in his eyes showed no signs of frailty. Between people like him and the abyssal inferno, this nation was filled with vigorous geezers. Hey, I guess that was a good thing. The apprentices weren't sure how to respond to their mentor's question that wasn't really a question, but eventually, the older one spoke up. "I'm ashamed to admit that I lost my presence of mind, even if the sight of something I admire, a black-haired magus, is to blame," he said in a strained voice. "Between both that and giving in to the temptation posed by a devil's sword, I'm deeply ashamed by the lack of willpower I've demonstrated." Yeah, that's pretty shameful. Honestly. There were plenty of black-haired magi going around. Like Krai Andrey. Wait a moment. I realized that the apprentice had said something interesting. I was certain Luke had been taken by the devil's sword, thus resulting in all the wounded people. But maybe that wasn't it. When I actually thought about it, if someone like Luke started swinging a devil's sword, most of these apprentices would be dead. So I had worried for nothing. "All right. Let's go home." "Well then," I said, "if that's all, I'll leave the rest to you." I turned on my heel and passed by the Sword Saint. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was light, but I was still firmly being held in place. I turned around and made eye contact. In a reversal from earlier, Soln was giving me a meaningful smile. Then he walked off, still holding on to me. Do you grievers think my apprentices are disposable or something? Soln Roel, the sword saint, was famous for being a level-headed swordsman. Not only was he talented, but he had also made considerable contributions to the art of swordsmanship. He had taken the techniques taught to him and evolved them into his own style, the Soln school of swordsmanship. It was known throughout the empire and abroad. Students of the Soln school were much more powerful than those of other schools, and were even said to be a match for mana material-enhanced hunters. Soln and his apprentices were trusted by the nobility and regarded as one of the forces that kept Zerbrudia safe. In other words, they were given a level of respect similar to that of knights. Not too long ago, they had sent Luke to help with security at the gathering of the White Blade. Or to rephrase that, he had the authority to send a cutting fiend to an important gathering and didn't panic when that fiend went wild. Isn't that incredible? Basically, what I'm getting at here is that having learned from the Soln school of swordsmanship and rapidly absorbing mana material, Luke was the most hazardous of our entire party. I couldn't keep taking responsibility for him. Soln continued to chew me out while dragging me along. Lucia sighed and followed behind us, but didn't help me out. You know, I was just thinking I needed to have a chat with you. Do you have any idea how many complaints come my way because of Luke? Do you? I'm 80 years old and I still can't comfortably let my successors take over. I'm very sorry for everything he's done. But wasn't he in part to blame? He was the one who allowed Luke to train his body and techniques without training his mind. I sent him to the gathering of the White Blade because he said he'd listen to the guards, but then he ignored them. He didn't do the job he said he'd do in exchange for being allowed to participate in the Supreme Warrior Festival. He tests strange new techniques on the younger apprentices, he tests strange new techniques on the new apprentices, he tests strange new techniques on me. Man, he's always testing strange new techniques. At least this means he's keeping busy. In order to temper his spirit, I've made him meditate, read books, sit under waterfalls, instruct younger apprentices, learn non-lethal techniques, take on jobs brought to us, do guard duty, but nothing changes. After all that, he still just does what he wants. He takes the other apprentices to raid treasure vaults, assault bandit lairs, and challenge other dojos while using our name without permission. Do you understand what it's like trying to get that man to think about anything besides swords? Soln sounded pretty fed up. I guess his irritation had been building up since I hadn't stopped by lately. I wanted to run for it, but he wasn't letting go. He dragged me into his estate. I think this is, something you should say to Luke himself, I said. I felt like cattle about to be sold off. Oh, you think I haven't? I don't think this is something you should say to me, I said without thinking. Brother. Soln made no response. He really was a great man. Franz would have blown his stack by now. I mustered a smile straight from my heart and said brightly, Luke's happy having you as a mentor. I can't think of anyone else I'd want to entrust him to. Did you really think that would work on me? I thought he might calm down if he got married, but when I introduced him to a potential partner, he cut her hair. I never heard about that. He tried to get Luke a wife. This guy was more daring than I thought. I was Luke's childhood friend, and even I wasn't brave enough to do that. That would require extreme finesse. Luke tended to talk about just about anything, and now, this is just my supposition, if he hadn't told me about this, then it was possible he hadn't realized the girl was meant to be a potential partner. I think, I said, he sees everyone as one of two types, those he can cut and those he shouldn't. What a troublesome guy. Is it possible that person was a swordsman? So Luke will cut anyone, so long as they're a swordsman? Is that it? Well, as long as they're somewhat strong, yeah. That's why we make him carry that wooden sword. I don't know if the mana material or Soln's training was to blame, but Luke's power knew no restraint. Let fortune smile upon Luke the Maverick. Luke was the one who said he'd agree to meet her if she was a strong swordsman. Let's stop talking about this. It's not getting us anywhere, and there's no point bringing it up with me. I'm certain this will take care of itself if we give it time. I didn't really believe that. For one thing, I heard that Soln himself used to be a real loose cannon. But my prediction might come true. I wanted to believe it was possible. Still, I said, I'm teaching him not to aim for vitals. Not even Ansem can bring them back if they're dead. Soln didn't say anything. With this awkward air hanging over us, he dragged me against my will into his estate, only letting me go once we had reached a fine room with tatami flooring. Soln's mansion was built in a style distinct from the rest of the imperial capital. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say it was like the hot spring resorts in Sulz. I took off my shoes and let him show me to a room. Then, before he could say anything to me, I sat atop my legs and planted my hands and head on the floor, all as if it were completely natural. You were meant to wear your shoes in most buildings in the capital, so most people weren't used to sitting with their legs folded beneath them. But I was different. If anything, the comfort of proper flooring left me unsatisfied. Soln didn't show any particular reaction to my groveling. Perhaps he was, to borrow the wording of the Soln school of swordsmanship, calm as the surface of a still lake. Even Lucia was showing more of a reaction. She was baffled. Soln sat across from me and said, I heard about the report from Sir Franz. Disaster will fall upon Zebrudia, it said. He thinks this disaster will come as some sort of curse. Heh! What's that? This is news to me. I just talked to Franz about mediating with this guy for me, but he didn't mention anything like this. Soln folded his legs and crossed his arms, then looked at me with a piercing gaze. It's, I said, like a disaster discount sale. How many is that in one season? Are you trying to tell me you're used to this, 1,000 tricks? No, that's not quite what I wanted to say. Even if it's not hard for me to think of a few recent examples. It's anyone's guess how the imperial capital stayed peaceful with so much going on. Was it possible that the abnormal treasure vaults and Fox and everything else weren't as major as I thought? If people like Ark were always gone when I needed them, was it because they were actually stopping disasters without my knowledge? I'll have to ask him next time I get the chance. What I don't understand, Soln said, is why you had that devil sword brought over. Luke might have stopped it, and maybe nothing would have happened if my students were better trained, but if it hadn't been brought to us in the first place, then none of this would have happened. Or is there something I'm not understanding? There was no anger in his eyes, but that was absolutely terrifying. I need a good excuse. No, maybe I should just be honest. Maybe he would be more likely to forgive me that way. It doesn't look like I'll be getting any help from Lucia. Teach that sword was cursed. I was picking my words carefully so as not to worsen his mood. Well, setting aside the results, I gave that to Luke, intending to show my gratitude for all you've done for my friend. I never thought for a moment that something like this would happen. A show of gratitude, you say? Sure, it was a rash decision on my part. That sword was pretty ominous. But if he had a problem, I would have preferred he take it up with Eliza, who had given me the sword in the first place. Though she probably just gave it to me without thinking. Luke and I both drew it, but neither of us got possessed or anything like that. So, how could I imagine that it would possess your apprentices? I couldn't. Not even the preterhuman artificer could foresee that. Brother, you're changing your story. You should have at least talked to him beforehand. Lucia, whose side are you on? Soln remained expressionless. His quiet gaze was scary, but in a different way from the pyromaniac ladies. I thought I could push my way past this, but that didn't seem likely. Also, I quickly added, I didn't know your apprentices would be so weak in Lucia's presence. Hearing this, Soln's eyes twitched for the first time. The idea that the capital's top school of swordsmanship had a weakness like that was amusing. But I also felt like I sort of had an idea of why they couldn't beat Luke. Being around people like Liz and Krai had taught me that everyone with exceptional strength had to give up some of their humanity in exchange. Wait, no. Ark existed. Sorry. Not everyone relinquished their humanity. Unfortunately for the apprentices, I'm not going to hand over Lucia. Not unless they can beat me. Of course, earning the right to challenge me required first defeating everyone in first steps. It's a rule of life that if you want to challenge the person on the top floor, you have to first beat everyone on the lower floors. While I thought about these useless matters, a few dozen seconds passed in silence until Soln opened his dry lips. He seemed calm, but he could have just been the type to appear expressionless when angry. Sort of like Lucia. Ah, what a pain, Soln said, sounding aggravated. A real headache. To think that was a present. Well, I wouldn't call it, indeed, that's a fine blade. Probably. I was frantically trying to talk my way out of this. If you have the strength to wield it, it will no doubt be of use to you. Probably. Well then, Soln let out a small sigh, this means I have to give you something in return. Wait here for a minute. Chem. Maybe he's not that mad after all. Soln left the room. Not even I was willing to risk escaping out the bathroom. Sitting next to me with equally good posture, Lucia said, "You need to exercise some restraint. That's Luke's mentor you were talking to." Sorry. But everything I said was true. I won't hand you over to any of these apprentices. What? Nobody said anything about that. Anyone who wants you will have to first defeat Luke. Of course, I didn't say I would necessarily hand her over even if they did defeat Luke. Lucia's feelings on the matter were what mattered most. Despite everything, when we left our hometown, our parents had told me to look after. No. They hadn't told me anything like that. In fact, sadly enough, it was the other way around. I kept my posture rigid the entire time, until Soln returned shortly after. He glanced at me before setting something rod-shaped wrapped in cloth upon the table. "Thanks for waiting," he said. "Not even my vault has much that can compare to that sword. This is a rare piece I got my hands on a long time ago." Soln removed the cloth. I thought he might be giving me a sword or something like that, but underneath that cloth was a staff. It was an onyx black staff about 2 meters long and looked as though it was wrapped in dense vines. At the top was a large gem, making it somewhat resemble my translation staff, Round World. It certainly looked expensive, but I had to wonder why it was in the Sword Saint's storehouse. I gave Soln a questioning look. "This," he said with a grin, "ended up in my hands long ago. I'm a swordsman, so I don't know much about these things, but I've been told it can amplify mana like nothing else out there. I figured the 1,000 tricks might be able to use this. I think this will sell for a nifty sum, but I hope you won't do that." "Oh, this is really something. I'll take it." Some saints offer their blessing, this one gave me a staff. I didn't use staves, but I was glad to have one more item in my collection. Lucia looked at it, her eyes wide with shock. I took the staff and tried lifting it up. Round World was heavy, but this one was light enough that even I could swing it around with ease. "What's its name?" I asked. "Don't know. Remember, this thing's been sleeping in my storehouse for a long time." Figuring out its name sounded like it could be difficult, but with so many distinct points, I figured I could manage something. Well, I don't quite understand what happened, but I'm glad that got resolved. I knew the Sword Saint was a magnanimous person. For goodness sake. Stop getting people worked up every time something happens. Walking next to me, Lucia let out a long sigh that seemed to take her soul with it. I didn't mean to get anyone worked up. Whether I offered compliments, spoke humbly, or was honest, people seemed to think I was trying to get them worked up. I thought I was just being genuine. "Man, I still can't believe I got a gift after causing all that trouble," I said while giving the staff a swing. Staves tended to be among the more expensive weapon-type relics. In particular, one could fetch an astronomical price if it had exceptional mana amplification capabilities or some special power that couldn't be emulated with modern technology. All Magi longed for something like Telm's bracelet-type staff or Krahi's staff. In my hands wasn't just a staff, but one from the vault of the famous Sword Saint. That heightened my expectations even more. Sure, I wouldn't be able to use it regardless of its nature, but you see, staves were even more likely than swords to pick their wielders. If this were the sort of relic that chose who could use it, Discerning its powers could be a very lengthy process. Out of the corner of her eye, Lucia watched me gleefully swing the staff around. "Every time you cause an uproar, my instructors and colleagues tease me," she grumbled. "They say, 'Oh, your brother, he went and did it again.'" "Oh, they do?" I replied. "How about you punch them? Please make it easier to know when you're joking." I never did anything, it was just that trouble came to me. Our world was a dangerous one. I couldn't feel safe walking outside with Lucia at my side. My sister cleared her throat and looked directly at me. "So, when are you going to visit my instructor?" "Chem? What for?" "I just told you back at the clan house. I had to cancel some plans at the last moment because of the Supreme Warrior Festival, and that made her angry. She said to bring you over." "Oh, you were serious about that? Your instructor really doesn't have an eye for people." Unlike Luke, Lucia was a diligent person. That's why her instructor didn't think highly of the way I was always dragging my talented younger sister into trouble. For different reasons, I was destined to be flooded with complaints from both of their mentors. I even got complaints from Ark's family, House Rodin. I was one of the foremost complaint collectors. If you gathered up everyone who had ever sent me a complaint, you'd have most of the imperial capital. If you could sell complaints, I'd be a billionaire. I made an effort to put on a gentle smile. "Lucia," I said in a gentle voice, "bringing me over would be the ruder option." I was sort of thinking the same thing. However, she told me to bring you, even if I had to drag you. Glaring at me, she gripped my sleeve. She was serious about this. I was, after all, her brother. Her older brother. That title was starting to lose its weight, but I still felt I was in charge of her well-being, even if nobody else likely saw it that way. If someone wanted to talk with her parents or something, then I, her great level 8 brother, could jump to the occasion. If there was something I could do for her, such as be a guarantor, then I'd do it. But it was a bit sad when that meant fielding complaints. Lucia's instructor was a professor at the imperial capital's foremost institute of magic, Zabrudia Academy of Magic. Also known as ZAM, the Zabrudia Academy of Magic was a renowned school of the arcane arts. It was an honored institute, with the Abyssal Inferno among its alumni. It employed magi who were different from the hunters who specialized in practical spellcasting. This was a genuine den of the unknowable, where research was conducted daily. On an individual level, none of its professors were as famous as the Sword Saint, but their organization dwarfed his. Appearing before Lucia's instructor was stressful, but in a different way than with the Sword Saint. For one thing, unlike swordsmen, you never knew what a magus might do to you. If I were going to see Lucia's instructor, then I wanted to have something to butter them up with. That's right. I looked at the staff I had just obtained. While we still didn't know what it did, it must have been fairly powerful if it was in the Sword Saint's vault. I was a little sad to part with it, but Eliza had given me that sword for free, and I couldn't think of a better way to improve a magus's mood. Maybe the Sword Saint anticipated Lucia's instructor being angry? "Man, I'm on fire today. It's my lucky day." "Lucia, how about we give this to your professor? Didn't you mention something about her searching for a staff?" It was fair to assume her anger would subside if we gave her a valuable staff. I know it'd work on me. Lucia blinked when she heard my sudden proposal. She looked at me dubiously. "Chem?" Yes, she was indeed searching for a staff. But when did I tell you about that? And we only just obtained this one. HMPH. Do I have to say it? I was just making stuff up. While we had been told not to sell this thing, nothing had been said about handing it to someone else. I still hadn't gotten attached to it, and if it managed to put the professor in a good mood, I'd call that a bargain. Besides, it was more natural for the professor to have this than it was for me. Things should be put where they belong. I'm sure your instructor will be satisfied with this. So go on, take it. Just be sure to tell her it's a gift from me. That should ease her anger. I see. Are you sure you want to give this away? I shoved the staff off onto her, and she looked at it with uncharacteristic concern. I couldn't blame her. It was uncommon to see a staff that was black from tip to end. Black was evocative of refinement, but in the relic world, it was also the color of curses. Ha ha ha, it's fine. You worry too much, Lucia. And you don't worry enough. The sword saint hadn't mentioned anything about dangers, and I had trouble believing someone as magnanimous as him would give us something hazardous. Besides, we'd be giving this to a pro. She might have known more about staff-type relics than most appraisers did. And Lucia wasn't the type to do things carelessly. Who knows, I said, the professor might also recognize this staff. Well, she is very knowledgeable, and, Lucia looked at me gravely. Hey, if you know something, then say. Just then, the sounding stone from Franz began to vibrate. What could he possibly want? I didn't want to answer the stone, but I did owe him after he had mediated with the sword saint. Since he answered my calls, it'd be a breach of etiquette not to answer his. It's not like we were meeting face to face or anything. I took a deep breath and activated the sounding stone. I tried to sound as cheerful as I could, so as not to anger him. Hello, Franz. Yoo-hoo, it's me. Do you always act like this? I've already told you, I'm not your friend. I just thought I'd try to help you relax. And you thought I would need that from you? Same old Franz. I try to be considerate, but, well, I guess this was how nobles were. Lucia pressed her lips together and looked up at me discontentedly. She never liked being interrupted. But I didn't know the staff's identity, and even if I told her that, she wouldn't believe me. That reminds me, thanks for the help this morning. I don't know how you did it, but Soln was in a good mood. That was your doing, wasn't it? He even gave me something in return. If only things always worked out like this. All I had asked Franz to do was make sure there weren't any odd newspaper articles about what had happened at the lounge, but that couldn't explain why things were going this smoothly. Franz and his people must have gone out of their way on my behalf. I suppose you could do things like this if you had authority, though I still felt a little bad for constantly asking favors of him. Hey, Franz, wanna join Grieving Souls? I tried to sound cheery, but Franz's response was a roar even stronger than before. About that? What the hell are you after? The incident with the Devil Sword is resolved, but the prophecy hasn't gone away. Pardon? The sudden screaming from the sounding stone caused some people passing by to stop for a moment, then hurry away. Lucia looked at the sounding stone, then at the staff in her hands. Then she gave me a skeptical glare. Damn him. Again with the rosy attitude. Franz Arjman slammed the sounding stone on the table. Within the imperial capital of Zebrudia, situated near the imperial castle, was the immense Arjman Manor. For generations, it had also served as a gathering spot for the Zero Order. The Zero Order was entrusted with protecting the emperor, while also undertaking a wider range of missions when His Imperial Majesty ordered it. Though they were small in numbers compared to the other orders, they were elites with the authority to order their counterparts if the need arose. The search for Nine-Tailed Shadow Fox and the prophecy indicating calamity were each more than enough to justify the Zero Order's mobilization. With their orders coming straight from the Emperor himself, they had no reason to be dissatisfied, and yet. Franz held a hand to his aching stomach. The other knights watched, completely accustomed to displays of rage from their captain. What in blazes is he thinking? He definitely knows that the divinarium can be trusted. Even after his reticence led to Key of the Land being activated, he hasn't changed his ways. If anything, he's getting worse. I didn't give him the sounding stone so he could get to know me better. Just thinking about it ticked him off. Nobody had ever greeted Franz, the current head of House Arjman and captain of the Zero Order, with a yoo-hoo. Not even the most undisciplined hunter would do such a thing. Whether that man was doing it genuinely or just to tease him, Franz found him impossible to deal with. Perhaps he had been given that personality as compensation for his near-divine powers of manipulation and artifice. Entertaining Krai's request, Franz had pressured the papers not to mention the Devil Sword incident, because he thought the prophecy was referring to the sword, or its curse, or something related. So if Krai had requested the Sword Saint's aid in dealing with it, Then Franz was willing to accept that there might be bloodshed, he was even willing to cooperate. But he hadn't for a second imagined that the prophecy might remain unchanged even after the incident had been resolved. "You're quite right, Captain," said a nearby young knight with a faint smile on his face. "Honestly, a mere hunter should know better than to act so arrogantly. Is there really any need to listen to him? The Empire has an excellent intelligence corps of its own, doesn't it?" This man had just recently joined the Order. His eyes were blue, and he had blonde hair with a slight wave. Handsome features and a slender build like his were rare among the Zero Order, whose members mostly had larger frames. Having just graduated from the Academy for Knights, he was on the young side to be joining the Imperial Guard. Someone must have high expectations for him. If Franz recalled correctly, his name was Hugh Regland. He was from one of the lower noble houses, but he had graduated top of his class at the Academy. A few knights tried to stop the recruit from offering his unsolicited opinion, but Franz gave them a chastising glare. He hadn't spent much time in the imperial capital lately, leaving him with few opportunities to meet new recruits. This would be a good opportunity to talk with him. "The orders come from His Imperial Majesty," Franz answered with a glare. He crossed his arms. "Which is to say, we're supposed to stay in contact." Franz had considered handing the sounding stone off to someone else, perhaps a civil servant or the captain of another order, one charged with keeping the peace. However, Krai Andrey's inscrutable nature would no doubt be too much for any of Zabrudia's other nobles to handle. That could lead to a gap in the sharing of information. In the end, the soundest option was for Franz to bear the stone himself. Even if that man talked to him like they were chums or something. "Not my subordinates, not my friends, nobody says yoo-hoo to me." At his age, he never thought someone, not even among his friends or family, could cause him so much mental anguish. He had an excess of anger and nowhere he could direct it. "What troubles our intelligence corps," the young knight said with a shrug, "is that they can't be worth much if they're being outdone by a single hunter." "I see our new member is a bold one," Franz replied. "Keep such thoughts to yourself, Hugh. Young people these days. Didn't this man just refer to the intelligence corps as excellent?" The intelligence corps supported Zabrudia from the shadows. The nature of their work meant they rarely ever took to the stage, but their competency was undeniable, and they had on a number of occasions stopped trouble before it could happen. Zabrudia wouldn't be where it was if not for them. "But Captain, after multiple days of keeping the 1,000 tricks under constant surveillance, the intelligence corps hasn't learned anything, correct? If you send me, I'll find something of value." "HMPH. I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not convinced. I've seen many hunters before, but none like him. Damn it all." Though the 1,000 tricks could obtain information faster than the intelligence corps, that did not mean they were incompetent. In the past, Franz might have agreed with Hugh, but that man had demonstrated a level of awareness that couldn't be explained merely by a good information network. Still, what were they supposed to do now? At the moment, they weren't aware of anything, besides the sword incident, ostensibly related to the prophecy. Just like last time, all they could do was gather personnel and make preparations so they could respond to any potential situation. However, just dealing with nine-tailed shadow fox had already put them on high alert and short on manpower. In other words, they were in the same position as last time. At this rate, they would once again be at the mercy of the 1,000 tricks. It was certainly possible. If only the divinarium's prophecy were a bit more specific, Hugh remarked, ignorant of Franz's concerns. Besides, the imperial capital's defenses are solid. Most hexes cast from outside won't have any effect, and we have measures to prevent cursed items from being brought inside. As for the matter of Soln the Sword Saint, that was smaller in scope than we had envisioned. "Are you sure we're not overthinking this?" Hugh spoke fluently, with a confident bearing. Indeed, the divinarium's prophecy had led Franz to anticipate casualties in the tens of thousands. Even if Krai hadn't made his move, the Devil Sword incident probably wouldn't have caused so much destruction. To begin with, hexes weren't the sort of spells that could cause physical destruction the way most other offensive spells could. What's more, Taking countermeasures against hexes was easy. While they could be deadly to someone not taking the necessary measures to protect themselves, such measures were simple and a fundamental part of the art of curses. The storied imperial capital had airtight defenses. It was fair to assume it was impossible for anyone to kill someone with a hex cast outside the perimeters. The one exception was, as Hugh had mentioned, a scenario like the Devil Sword case, in which someone brought a cursed item into the city. But the sort of item capable of killing thousands of people wouldn't just be lying around wherever. But they were all well aware of this. Their problem was that despite their stalwart defenses, the prophecy hadn't faded. "You're all letting your nerves get the best of you," Hugh said. "Captain, don't look so grave. Relax a bit. Don't you think the renowned Zero Order should show a bit more confidence?" Franz narrowed his eyes. The other knights looked at Hugh with exasperation. Infallible discipline was what the Zero Order was expected to show. They were assumed to be competent and frequently served at the Emperor's side, meaning they had a duty to thoroughly fulfill any orders given to them. In this regard, Hugh was far too flippant. Having graduated valedictorian suggested he was talented. He was slender but had a good figure and a dashing appearance. Franz had heard he tended to be just a bit extravagant when it came to women. He was probably used to being showered in praise, with few failures to call his own. In some ways, the audaciousness he was displaying before his captain was commendable. Unfortunately for him, Franz got his fill of audacity just through the 1,000 tricks. For a moment, Franz let his scrutinous gaze rest on this rude junior knight before eventually giving him a slow nod. "Chmph. I see. Well then, Hugh, I've got a job for you. On your pride as a noble, head over to the 1,000 tricks and wrench what information you can from him. Hang around him for a bit, and cooperate with him. Don't try to tell me it's impossible." A moment's thought suggested this wouldn't go well. In terms of age, Hugh and the 1,000 tricks were similar, but they were vastly different in terms of skills and experience. Accolades like graduating top of his class wouldn't do Hugh any good here. When it came to audacity, the one who wore a floral shirt when escorting the Emperor easily won out. Hell, when it came to being extravagant with women, it was hard to beat the guy who allegedly owed his childhood friend massive amounts of money. What insanity! If there was one thing Hugh had going for him, it was probably his bravery. Considering how he had just talked to his captain, it was hard to think he would be intimidated by a level 8. Having one more novice knight around wouldn't make things any easier for the rest of the order. In which case, they may as well give Hugh an early opportunity to learn some humility. It would benefit them in the long run. Hugh was briefly taken aback by Franz's acquiescence, but a faint smile quickly formed on his lips. That smile, however, did not reach his eyes. He had strength and spirit, and burning in the depths of his eyes was ambition. Perhaps this was just how youth were meant to be. "Your wish is my command, Captain," Hugh said with a bow that was deferential, but perhaps exaggerated. "I, Hugh Regland, will do everything in my power to ensure your peace of mind. Get going." Standing straight as a rod, Hugh left the room. Franz watched him with a bitter gaze before turning his attention back to his other subordinates. As captain of the Zero Order, it was his duty to carry out the Emperor's orders. He had arranged for the aid of the Sword Saint. However, if the prophecy persisted, they would follow the next lead. They would eliminate each possibility, one at a time. That was how knights operated. "If it's not an issue of pure might," Franz said, "it might be magic. I guess we have no choice. Contact specialists at every institution and inform them of our work. And be discreet about it." Captain Franz worried far too much. No, Hugh thought to himself, perhaps I should be glad to have an opportunity so early in my career. Hugh kept his excitement from rising to the surface, making his way to the First Steps clan house. The Zero Order was the only one of Zabrudia's orders that answered directly to the Emperor. They could be considered one of the more popular orders, and through good performance, their members could earn the attention of the Emperor himself. Hugh came from one of the lower noble houses. It was hardly anything grand, but with 2 older brothers, Hugh had no chance of inheriting his father's title. For someone like him, The Imperial Guard was an ideal opportunity. In this order, a major accomplishment could very likely be rewarded with a noble title, or perhaps an offer to marry into a noble family that lacked a male heir. Hugh was young. He didn't have any capital to his name, but he was attractive and had received a good education at the academy. His ability to absorb mana material wasn't bad either. What's more, he was lucky. Zebrudea was a true meritocracy. It's why someone like Hugh, whose house was closer to the bottom of the hierarchy, was able to graduate as valedictorian. Making good use of a fine opportunity obtained so early after joining the order would make him stand out. He might be able to aim for the rank of vice-captain before turning 30. Good or bad, there was no shortage of rumors about this level 8 hunter, the 1,000 tricks, the preterhuman artificer. Even Captain Franz had been thrown for a loop by this man, but that just made it all the more worthwhile for Hugh to outsmart him. Hugh's rude remarks from earlier had all been a performance on his part. He knew the 1,000 tricks wasn't to be underestimated. The Explorers Association was strict in its assignment of levels, and this was the treasure-hunting Holy Land. How could Hugh possibly belittle the man who had reached level 8 at a younger age than anyone before? Reaching such a high level without even being from an esteemed bloodline gave him something in common with Hugh. However, the young knight had a secret weapon that no noble would be likely to resort to. When the clan house came into view, he slowed his pace, steadied his breath, and put on a serious expression. He could see reflected in the shiny glass windows a handsome young man clad in the armor of the Zero Order. The captain had told him to wrench information out of the 1,000 tricks, then come back. Of course, if it were as simple as that, the captain wouldn't have been so vexed. But he had something no other noble had. No, it was more accurate to say nobles had something that he didn't: pride. They were dealing with a man who couldn't be moved by authority, money, or might. Misunderstanding that was why Captain Franz had been unable to glean anything, despite knowing that this man had information. Hugh was different. He would temporarily cast aside his pride and take control of his future. If this task made him acquainted with a high-level hunter, that, too, would be a useful asset in the future. He proceeded onward. Though he wore a calm facade, he had the mentality of someone going to battle. Suddenly, the door opened and out came a girl with pink hair and tan skin. Hugh's eyes flew open. The long hair tied back, the healthy tan, the slender limbs that still showed a graceful strength. With all that and the skimpy gear of a thief, there was no doubt in his mind she was from the same party as the 1,000 tricks. This was Liz Smart, the stifled shadow, the one feared for her mercilessness. It appeared luck really was on Hugh's side. He would be much closer to accomplishing his goal if he earned the trust of one of the 1,000 tricks' childhood friends and party members. It helped that Hugh had a bit of confidence when it came to dealing with women. There was, of course, his intellect and strength, but his handsome face was another of the advantages he had inherited from his parents. Most hunters were rugged men, so he figured a sweeter complexion would be a powerful weapon. He could do this. He would be humble in the extreme, talk to her like a gentleman would. She was known for her intensity, but offering some excessive flattery for the 1,000 tricks should solve that problem. He put on a perfect smile and approached her. Liz came to a halt, then slowly turned his way. Then Hugh abruptly lost consciousness. He felt a strong impact, then slowly came to. When his brain was working again, he didn't shout or open his eyes. He kept his eyes closed and tried to disguise the fact that he was awake. As elites, the Knights of the Zero Order were trained in all sorts of skills. Hugh believed he could adapt to emergencies as well as any capable hunter. He steadied his breath and tried to get a grasp of the situation. He could move his hands and legs, so he probably hadn't been bound or anything. The dull pain at the base of his neck was probably from whatever had knocked him out. He hadn't let his guard down, yet he hadn't even been able to fight back. It didn't require any deduction to figure out who had done this. There were only so many people who would freely attack a knight on such a busy street. He had heard that that girl was fierce and quick to strike, but this exceeded his expectations. He had underestimated grieving souls. Fortunately, the wound was a light one. It seemed not even the stifled shadow would abruptly kill someone after he'd approached her with a smile. He didn't think he was in a bad situation. That sort of attack would enrage most knights, but Hugh could endure it. Seeing as no noble had managed to get along with the 1,000 tricks so far, this was about what he had expected. Hugh believed in himself. He told himself he could do it. Then he heard some chatter. There was the harsh voice of Liz Smart, a relaxed male voice, and a befuddled female voice. This guy here, Krai Baby, he was looking at me with evil in his eyes. He's definitely our enemy, right? Huh. He was looking at you. PS pseudo-handsome dude number 2. A swift kick sent Hugh to the floor, which was followed by the cold metal of her relic boots trampling him. His armor, unique to his order and made of a special alloy, groaned. For someone so thin, she was incredibly strong. Even in the Zero Order, very few people were capable of bending this armor with sheer brute force. As he endured the pain and went in and out of consciousness, Hugh heard a heated voice. Hey, he's got the armor of the Imperial Guard, so he's probably someone special, right? I don't think he wants to kill us, but I saw the odd look in his eyes. He's totally our enemy. See, calm down, Lizzie. What are these people talking about? All Hugh did was look at her. Sure, he had hidden intentions, but he hadn't even shown any hostility, much less any sort of intent to kill. She said he had an odd look in his eyes. He thought there might have been a reason he had been attacked, but this defied comprehension. Surely people looked at her all the time. Did she always respond like this? And he was wearing the armor of the Imperial Guard, so what else could he possibly be? Hugh had to stop worrying. He quickly suppressed his well of doubts. He was here to get results, no matter what. He was certain Captain Franz didn't expect anything from him, but that just made it all the more important that he succeed here. He had to think, not come up with excuses. I have to find a way past this berserker. Shut up, T. Come on, crybaby, I did a good thing, right? Look. He's awake, yet he's pretending to be knocked out. He's 100% up to no good. She can tell? The boot pressed into him with increased force, and Hugh opened his eyes. He quickly tried to move, but the boot held him like a vice, preventing even the slightest movement. He struggled to breathe. A ragged breath escaped his lips. He could see Liz, a shine in her eyes, the black-haired girl said to be her apprentice, and there, lounging on the couch, was a black-haired young man with a vaguely doltish look on his face. For a moment, Hugh forgot about the pain. This unremarkable man didn't strike him as anyone powerful. This man matched the description given by Captain Franz, but that knowledge didn't make it any easier to believe he was a level 8. Hugh failed to understand it. He couldn't flatter this man. Even after coming all this way with the intention of buttering him up, even after having lavished praise on idiots of all varieties, he couldn't find anything worth praising. This man had no power. He had no drive. He didn't even have the same vitality exuded by the stifled shadow, nor her cunning. It was a perfect disguise. But was it really a disguise? Compared to other high-level hunters, there was very little easily available information about the 1,000 tricks. Descriptions of his appearance were particularly scant, but Hugh now knew why. There was nothing worth saying. If you said a level 8 hunter was a man with nondescript black hair and black eyes, not many people would believe you. They would doubt your judgment. The 1,000 tricks looked in Hugh's direction, but not at him. It was a content expression, or to put it rudely, an empty-headed one, that made Hugh uneasy. This man's overwhelmingly unremarkable face would be impervious to flattery. It made Hugh break out in a cold sweat. What do I do? What should I do? How could he get on this man's good side in order to accomplish his task? And why didn't he say anything, even though one of his party members was stepping on an innocent knight? Hugh somehow managed to move his fingers just enough so he could tap the floor. Then, the 1,000 tricks finally did something. He gave a witless smile and looked at Liz. Gee, good girl. You did great, Liz. Super. I did. I really did. Yeah, Hugh had seen all sorts of parties, but never one like this. Hunters had a reputation for being brutes, but that changed when it came to the higher level ones. The levels allotted by the Explorers Association were proof of a hunter's prowess, making these levels a pillar of the association. They generally didn't give high levels to members who exhibited a lack of humanity. While many hunters worked solo, just about anyone who led a party showed strong leadership informed by excellent charisma. But this man just said super and yeah. That could hardly be described as leadership. Good job. You're great, Liz. There. Hee hee. I just knew you'd want me to bring him here, Liz preened wolfishly. There, the 1,000 Tricks muttered. Good girl. Good job. Now let him go. Then will you give me something cursed, like you did with Luke and Lucy? Good girl. Bad girl. There. The pressure disappeared. Holding his chest, Hugh pulled himself up and saw Krai, rubbing Liz's head with a vacant look in his eyes. Hugh felt like he had been struck by lightning. Whereas Krai had a forced smile and was moving his hands in an automated motion, Liz's eyes had a vigorous shine. There was no way someone who could read Hugh's intentions just through his glance, whether her reading was correct, however, was doubtful, could fail to notice Krai's attitude. Yet this was her response. What power this man must have if he could have such an effect on a maniac willing to knock out a man clad in the regalia of the Imperial Guard. Hugh had worn a number of masks to get where he was. So he understood that while it was hard to manipulate people by acting, it was even harder to manipulate while being genuine. If he could keep her under control with such half-hearted replies, he must have gone to great lengths to discipline the stifled shadow. Hugh began to feel like he understood why the 1,000 Tricks was considered so confounding and called things like the preterhuman artificer. So far, every time Hugh had successfully flattered someone, it was because he had understood their talents. But how was he supposed to get on this man's good side? What did the stifled shadow like about him? You know, Liz said, my mentor keeps telling me to bring you over. So will you come with me sometime? Good girl. You're great, Liz. Master, nothing she's done is good. Hugh saw the way he ignored the recoiling girl with the black hair. He noticed his mellow smile and dry voice. He was certain that this man, Krai Andrey, wasn't listening to them. Every detail of his behavior made it clear he wasn't paying any attention. Not even the shrewdest of nobles or merchants could afford to act this way. They had no need to in the first place. Perhaps he could do this because of his high level, his languid, accustomed attitude, and the way Liz was unfazed by it. That couldn't have sprung up overnight. Hugh wanted to understand this power. It was unlike any sort of leadership he had ever heard of. If he had these skills, then he, too, would be able to rise to great heights. He no longer cared about his mission to get information. There was something he had to know. He had to learn the secrets behind this man's power. If Hugh stayed by his side, would he learn the true nature of his power? Would he be able to make it his own? He watched intently so as not to miss the slightest detail. The sight of him absent-mindedly rubbing Liz's head began to appear majestic in Hugh's eyes. Then, for the first time, Krai looked at Hugh. He slowly blinked and stared for a moment. Eventually, he nodded and said to Liz, "Good girl, Liz. Now, go back where you belong." "Huh? What about my cursed item?" "That's a good girl." "And my mentor?" "That's a good girl." Even though he was completely shutting her out, Liz took her arms off Krai and gave him some space. With a nihilistic smile, Krai crossed his legs in an oddly exalted fashion. A sense of deep respect overtook Hugh. He straightened his posture, put his hands to the floor, and lowered his head. "Krai, please, take me as your apprentice." Hugh cast aside his honor. He even forgot to introduce himself, something he rarely did. "Ah. Apprentice, her? Yeah, Wait. Her," the 1,000 Tricks replied in his dullest voice thus far. "How in the world did this happen?" Looking down at the young knight bowing before me, I sat in a daze, trying not to think too hard about the situation. Since coming to the imperial capital, Several people had requested to be my apprentice, but this was the first time a knight I didn't even know the name of bowed before me. What's more, I hadn't even done anything this time around. I was struggling to hide my confusion when suddenly, I met Tino's gaze. She had come here with Liz. Incredible as always, master, she stammered, just as bewildered as I was. Without doing anything, you've managed to make a proud knight of the Zero Order bow before you. That's, something only a level 8 could do. If I was right, it sounded like she wasn't praising me so much as she was questioning this guy's sanity. Maybe Liz had hit his head a bit too hard when she brought him in. She was oddly proud of herself. She was still sharp as ever if she had knocked out a knight for no good reason. I set aside the groveling knight and focused on Liz for the time being. I already told you, the thing with Luke was a coincidence. Lucia getting that staff was also because things just happened to play out that way. You can say I want 1-2 all you want, but there's nothing I can do. It's not a matter of accomplishments, I can't give you what I don't have. Liz had apparently heard about what happened with Luke and thought it was incredibly unfair. Liz, how old are you again? Calm down. Everything you're saying is wrong. Luke got a devil sword because that's just how things went. It wasn't a reward, the staff I gave to Lucia isn't cursed, and suddenly bringing me an unconscious knight isn't something to be rewarded. I had too many objections I wanted to raise, and I was tired. Why was she so hungry for trouble? We had just gone through a number of ordeals at the Supreme Warrior Festival, so how did she still have so much energy? If Liz got violent here, Franz would be the one with a headache, but I didn't think she understood that. Liz remained unfazed by my explanation, her finely shaped eyes shimmering with expectation. She believed I would bring more trouble. I didn't like being trusted in that way. The case with Luke had definitely increased her expectations, and now there would be no getting through to her. I casually reached out and ruffled her hair in an attempt to rub out those memories. There, Liz. Good girl. Tino's cheeks flushed as she watched my lazy attempt to placate her mentor. Then, the knight at the center of all this got up on unsteady feet. His eyes were as wide as they could open. Magnificent, he said in amazement. This is the sort of control a level 8 commands. I dunno why, I keep finding myself surrounded by weirdos. Please keep such thoughts to yourself, master. In what way did it look like I had anything under control? If there was a way to rein in Liz, I wanted to know it. The young knight straightened his posture as though the thought had just occurred to him. With a dignified expression that would win the heart of any woman, he bowed. Please forgive the delayed introduction. I'm Hugh Regland, Knight of the Zero Order. On the orders of Captain Franz, I'm to serve under your command for the time being. Please, don't hesitate to put me to work. That's funny. Nobody told me about this. I could understand if they had sent someone to cooperate in investigations, but having a knight to order around struck me as strange. This guy could try to act all prim and proper, but it wouldn't make up for his earlier behavior. Though, that might have been a result of getting walloped by Liz, so I didn't say anything. Hugh was undeterred by my suspicious gaze. If I were in his place, I would have broken under the pressure and looked away, but this guy was one of the elites. So I guess this means Franz plans to put me to work. He didn't know who he was dealing with. Nobody had told him there was nothing more obnoxious than an incompetent busybody. I didn't expect anyone to understand it, but my laziness was driven by ironclad principles. I crossed my arms and tapped my elbows. I gave him a hard-boiled smile and said, "All right, I understand. Here, for starters, you can go look for a cursed item I can give to Liz."